Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. The Tory leadership battle filling the front pages this morning after some big beasts were knocked out yesterday for failing to secure enough backing from MPs. One of those, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, will be here in just a second. His own dream of being PM over. Now he wants to fulfil the former Chancellor's dream of getting the keys to number 10 by backing Rishi Sunak. Someone who thinks that's a bad idea, Jacob Rees-Mogg, will also be on the programme. We'll also speak to another contender, Nadhim Zahawi, with us earlier on in the week, as you remember, after he made the ballot paper, voting due to start at lunchtime. Some exclusive polling as well to bring you on how Labour is gaining ground on the government. It's Wednesday, the 13th of July. Doomed to fail, a warning to Tory leadership contenders from business leaders about their ambition for tax cuts, as the list of candidates is reduced to 8.
And that list will be whittled down further this afternoon when MPs vote in the first round, with the results expected around 5 o'clock.
Planning your summer holiday will reveal which airports and airlines are the worst for cancellations and delays.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for? People don't believe it. They think I'm a serial killer.
A message from behind bars. Britain's most notorious prisoner, Charles Bronson, leaves a voice note for our crime correspondent as he tries to receive a pardon. 77 minutes of horror. The new footage that shows a police officer sanitising his hands as a gunman in Texas kills schoolchildren.
The Sri Lankan president has fled the country for the Maldives. I'm in Colombo and I'll have the latest on the crisis.
Ambulance alert, how the heatwave is stretching our emergency services. We'll talk to the boss of the Welsh ambulance service. Also to come on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us, right around the world.
I'll be asking a meteorologist here at Reading University, why is it so hot? How long is it likely to last? And if we can expect more sizzling summers in future.
I'm floating in heaven, I'm so high.
And a galaxy far, far away. Queen's Brian May and 10cc write a song for space as the NASA telescope reveals stunning images of the universe. We'll speak to Graham Goldman from 10cc. Good morning, everybody. Teasing promises of tax cuts has become a theme of this Tory leadership campaign as the list of candidates running to replace Boris Johnson is whittled down to 8. But there's a warning this morning from business leaders that this approach is doomed to fail. That from the CBI, who's also doomed to fail in their leadership ambitions. The first round of voting opens this lunchtime, and we'll know which candidates have been knocked out by around 5 p.m. Let's take you through who's left, should we? Here we go. The current frontrunners are the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who we understand already has the support of 47 MPs. Penny Mordaunt currently has 28 MPs publicly backing her, with Liz Truss slightly behind with 22. The other 5 contenders still in the race are Tom Tugendhat, the current Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi, Kemi Badenoch, Jeremy Hunt and Suella Braverman. Now, out of the contest are the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who'll be with us shortly, the former Health Secretary Sajid Javid and Raymond Shisti, who all pulled out of the race in the run-up to yesterday's deadline after failing to secure enough nominations. We can also bring you this poll shared exclusively with us this morning, which suggests Labour has increased its lead over the Conservatives since the Cabinet resignations. The figures from the polling company Delta Poll suggest the Labour lead over the Conservatives is now 10% when looking at voting intention across these 3 parties. 56% of those who voted Tory at the last election think Mr Johnson is doing badly in his job. Of the mandate often quoted by Boris Johnson, the 14 million who voted for the Conservative Party at the last election, only 8.5 million would actually vote that way if there were a general election tomorrow. Grant Shapps is here. Morning.
Morning.
How are you? Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. What happened?
In terms of
your campaign?
Yeah, so I came in obviously very late in the day, and but got off to a good start. The rules were then actually changed. They doubled the nomination figures from previously in order to speed through the competition, because we're keen to have a new leader in place. I would have been nominated on the old rules. I thought probably not on the new rules. And in any case, looking at the candidates, talking to all the candidates, as I was doing throughout, I actually came to a conclusion that another candidate had the right policies and could certainly be ready to do the job on day one as he walked into Downing Street, and that's, of course, Rishi.
Politics is brutal, though, isn't it?
Isn't it?
How do you feel about it this morning?
I very much enjoyed my time in the race. I think I came and spoke to you here on... No, not
all
you.
The time,
it was to Sophie, sorry, on Sunday. I was
We're
in
very
the studio.
similar again, it's all the time.
I can see things from the same pod. I was in the studio on Sunday, and as I say, I enjoyed the race. I was able to put forward my platform. I would have, on the previous rules, been nominated. The rules were switched. But as I say, Rishi has a good plan, which was the closest to the things that I was saying in terms of the need to tackle inflation, the need to grow the economy. And so I was pleased to back him, and here we are.
Well, you say that, but let me just remind our viewers a couple of things that you said and tell me why you've now folded in behind Rishi Sunak. You pledged to halt the planned rise in corporation tax, cut income tax by a penny, and spend 3% of GDP on defence. At the time, Rishi Sunak called those sort of pledges fairy tales and arbitrary targets.
Yes, he wasn't calling that, he was other people's, the generality. But let's just sort of look at this. Politics is, of course, about finding the best route through, and we're grown-ups. You have to look at where compromises exist. He is raising defence spending to 2.5%. I said 3. He's raising it to 2.5 from 2.3 at the moment. He is planning to bring down private individual tax, the basic rate, from 20 to 19p. So he's doing that, albeit that I was saying, well, couldn't it be done a bit quicker? But he is moving in that direction. He has just this week, last week, delivered the biggest tax cut that we've had for a generation, with a huge change in the threshold
that we've got the highest tax
national insurance
for 70 years, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had the
we can't really...
we've had the only pandemic that we've had for over 100 years, and yes, it's had a cost to it. That's true.
But I mean, OK. So even if you're saying that you're trying to do a similar thing, he was saying it was a fairy tale to try to do it in the timescale that you and others are suggesting.
Yeah. So there was a range, wasn't there? Just to explain this, there was a range of different, manifesto commitments, and some people saying they would go a lot further and a lot faster. I was saying probably something in between those candidates and what Rishi was saying. And so as I looked around, pretty logically, I'm looking for the person who was closest to my position and actually I thought had the credibility to do it. And I think the reason that Rishi has both of those things is that he recognises, as I did, that inflation is the biggest single issue that we must tackle. At 10%, it's extremely high. And the first thing to do is to tackle that. The second thing to do is to go further with tax cuts. And as he said yesterday when he launched, it's not a question of if there'll be tax cuts, there'll be a question of when there's tax cuts. And that's Rishi's policy. And again, I thought that was the right and responsible position.
OK, Rees-Mogg says he's a socialist. I mean, he's saying it as if that's a dirty word. What do you think?
It's just, look, I think it's best if we just concentrate on the positives for each of our candidates and avoid sort of, perhaps others wouldn't agree, but in this context, quite extreme language.
Is socialist a dirty word? It's not to a lot of my viewers this morning.
Well, I mean, clearly a guy who, is fiscally conservative, wants to get the debt and deficit down and debt falling as a proportion of the overall economy. I mean, the idea that this is, socialist is clearly not true. But as I say, I think, and this is what I'll be doing throughout this campaign, it's best to focus on what you have to offer. Now, Jacob is supporting a different candidate. She'll be able to say what she supports. Rishi can say what he supports. People, the membership, will eventually make that judgment. And I think that is far better than trading sort of, disparaging comments as this was intended.
What do you think about suggestions that we should withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, look, the European Convention on Human Rights, something that we helped set up, has its purpose. I haven't specifically spoken to Rishi about the issue, but I don't think that it would be an early priority. The main thing is to get the laws working as we need them for us.
They're to make a better life for the people of Europe. The only people that are not in it are Belarus and Russia, I think.
Well, that's as I say. Well, I don't think it's part of any platform here.
Just to clarify, what then? Well, let me ask you about Nadine Dorries first of all. She's talking about dark arts and dirty tricks. Your campaigns always split the party, don't they?
Well, look, a leadership campaign by the very nature
we'll use that word.
Of course, do have the potential to bring out differences. On the plus side, when they're done well, and we've seen this happen before as well, when Cameron and David Davis ended up battling it out in the final. It was actually a very good process for the party. Ideas were brought forward. People said, by the way, I remember that campaign, at the beginning of the campaign, oh, this is going to be brutal. Oh, everyone's going to be sort of bashing the heck out of each other. In fact, that's not what happened in the end. And I think here the same will be true. Of course, sometimes there'll be, lively debate. But in the end, I think, and I certainly know this will be the case with Rishi, he will put forward the positive case, others can put forward their case.
So what's wrong with offering votes to others? Why is that such a bad thing? As somebody quite close to you quite recently once said, them's the breaks.
Well, look, simply in this case, it just didn't happen. I think the idea was...
Are you sure?
Yes, the idea, and not only am I sure, the person that was suggested, which was Jeremy Hunt, himself says every single person on his nomination paper is somebody who's very close to his campaign, so even he's rubbished it. Look, again, I don't want to... let's just focus on the positives.
OK, let's do that then. Talk to me about Rishi Sunak's very slick video. How long do you think it took him to cut that?
I don't think he personally cut it at all, but I know it wasn't filmed until Wednesday, so he'd already resigned. OK. And he wasn't planning to be Prime Minister until he resigned. He hadn't got a campaign up and running. He didn't have people in the background working for him. He didn't have an office. Well, what I think is the case is that he was becoming increasingly concerned about the direction of travel. There had been a long series of missteps as far as he was concerned, and I don't think it makes sense to pretend otherwise. We know that was the case. But, in terms of the video, as you say, in terms of sort of actually pulling the campaign together, that part of it is from post his resignation. I know specifically the video was filmed on Wednesday.
OK. I'm sure not all of it was.
Well, there was stock footage. There was stock footage in there from the 1960s. You're right, some of it already existed.
Yeah, and other stuff had been filmed before as well. They didn't knock that together in such a short period of time. Well, unless you can prove otherwise, they can come on. The filmmaker can come on and tell me exactly how they did
that. The challenge the other way around.
You do politics. I know how to make telly. I know how to make those movies, and it takes a little bit longer than that, trust me.
All I know is he sat down
Sunak wrote to Johnson last week, questioning his competence, his honesty and his seriousness. Then yesterday, he said, he's the best thing since sliced bread. So why is he doing that? Why is he changing his tune?
Well, look, again, I think that it's clear that you can both be brilliant as an individual and also be flawed. And as Rishi pointed out, as I pointed out, in many times, actually, over the last year or two, Boris Johnson is a brilliant individual who did many remarkable things, including getting us through this Brexit nightmare that we lived through for 6 years.
But not good enough to be Prime Minister anymore.
Doing the vaccine, what's happened with the Ukraine and the way that he's been one of the principal leaders in the world, but obviously made mistakes. And like all of us, you can both be great and flawed, and I'm afraid it applies to every single one of us. I mean, there are no exceptions to that, are there?
No, there are not. However, being Prime Minister, it would appear that he still has quite a lot of grassroots support, and so Rishi Sunak has been reading the runes and thinking, I need to not knife him in the back anymore.
Look, I just don't agree with that at all. Rishi, myself, others, we all work very, very closely with the Prime Minister, and even right through to close to the end, to try to pull things round, to try to rescue a situation which, over a period of time...
Well, in the background, he was organising his own campaign, just in case.
Well, look, as I say, your particular allegation about the video, I think, is wrong, but
well, we'll see.
We'll see. All I know is Rishi sat down and recorded it on Wednesday, as I understand things. But clearly, anybody could see that there were problems. Anybody could see that things were going wrong. That does not detract from the fact that Boris Johnson has been remarkable in many ways, and it's a huge sadness to many people, many voters, myself included as a member of his cabinet, that he wasn't able to pull it around. And as you know, I personally thought that despite, you know, some issues, some misgivings, some shortcomings, I actually thought his advantages outweighed.
OK, the UK ambassador to Ukraine sat where you are last week and said they're going to crowdfund to have him in Ukraine because if we don't want him, they will.
Well, I know I speak to my opposite number, Alexander Kubrakov, who's the infrastructure transport minister in Ukraine, and he's a huge fan of Boris Johnson. But even more so, he's a fan of the way that this government has responded to Ukraine. And one thing I'm absolutely sure about is if Rishi, and I imagine even other people, were elected, Ukraine would be front and foremost of their plan. In fact, Rishi's funded...
Might be a bit busy trying to do with our economy as well.
I was going to say Rishi's funded £2.3 billion to that battle in Ukraine.
Talk to me about our infrastructure. What on earth is going on with our airports and airlines?
Well, I've been very concerned about the way that their bounce back, or over bounce back in a sense, from COVID has caused all those queues and problems at the airport. I've been working with them. We've got a 22-point plan that we've put together with the sector, which has included changing the law to speed up things like the processing of security clearances, using some Brexit freedoms as it happens, and ask the airports and the airlines to be realistic about the programme that they run, the flight programme that they run, all in order to ensure that when the schools break up for the summer across the whole country, and they already have in parts in Scotland, for example, that we see the airports run as smoothly as possible. I should point out this is not a UK-only problem.
Well,
the same issues are...
My viewers care about the UK. They don't care about what's happening in Europe. They care about the UK. Which country, which airport do you think, according to our data that we've just done, which airport do you think is the worst?
I can't let you just dismiss the international nature of it. Aircraft fly...
Well, I just did. Which airport do you think is the... Well, I can, because it's my programme.
But you can't, because
yes,
aircraft fly around the world...
Talk to me about which you think is the worst airport.
I have to finish this point. Aircraft fly around the world, and when they do, the delays at other places also create the delays
Which do you think is the worst airport in the UK?
Well, several airports have had problems. Manchester's been very well publicised. I don't know which is the worst. It depends how you measure it. It depends if it's passenger numbers or delays or percentages. Who do you think has cancelled most flights? Again, you tell me if you've got a number. It will depend how you judge it. We know that Manchester's had problems. We know that Gatwick's had problems. We know that Heathrow have shortened have lessened the number of flights that they have as well.
Do you feel that you've been concentrating enough on what's happening on our railways, given that you've been running a leadership campaign?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been working solidly.
Because the train drivers are going on strike now as well, aren't they?
Well, the train drivers whose average salary, median salary, is nearly £60,000 a year...
Doesn't take away from the point I've made.
I just don't believe that this is the right time for them to strike. The public, everybody watching this, every household pays £600 each to keep them all in jobs and all off furlough.
Still going on strike. What are you going to do about it?
And I don't think that is justified. And one of the things which I've talked about before is we have to modernise our railways. We can't have a situation where we can't run services at the weekends because we aren't allowed to put it in the contract that sometimes you work a weekend. We're not asking people to work 7 days. So we have to modernise the railways. Then we'll be able to get a settlement. At £60,000, nearly average salary a year, I think the public will be with us on this.
We're going to have to leave it there. We've got lots of things left up in the air. Hopefully we'll see you again very soon and we'll see what happens. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you, Mr Shapps. Boris Johnson will face Prime Minister's questions for the first time today since his resignation. You can catch that live on Sky News from 12 o'clock. I'm pulling a double shift today. The first ballot in the Conservative Party leadership contest takes place between 1:30 and 3:30 this afternoon as Tory MPs vote for Boris Johnson's replacement. We'll have all the results here on Sky around 5 o'clock with Sophie, who looks very much like me. And we have a special programme coming up next week. Sky News will host a live television debate with those who want to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and the country's next Prime Minister. The event will take place next Monday, the 18th of July, with the candidates taking questions from a virtual studio audience. You can, of course, be part of the audience. If you'd like to get involved, put your questions to the candidates. Email newsdebates@sky.uk. Right now, though, let's take you to Sri Lanka, where there's a developing situation. Police have been using tear gas on protesters at the Prime Minister's residence. What on earth is going on? Let's take you to Colombo. Nicole is standing by. Nicole, tell us more.
Thousands of people have been streaming towards the Prime Minister's office. This is one of the buildings that they haven't occupied. The reason they're heading down the road there is because they want the Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, to resign, along with the President. Now, the President, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, is set to resign. As we know, he's already left the country. He's in the Maldives. He went out on a military jet, and it's expected that later on he'll, from the Maldives, head off to another country. So it's a real D-Day here in Sri Lanka. Essentially, it feels like this is the end of the Rajapaksas. This is what these people have been demanding for months. They've been on the streets. They've been enduring hardship. The country's economy has collapsed. They're fed up with it. But clearly, the potential or today's resignation that we're expecting of the President isn't enough for them. They want him and all of his cronies out of the country. So that Prime Minister's office is a bit further down there. They've told us that they're not going to storm it, but tear gas was fired earlier today as they got closer to it. Whatever happens, though, Sri Lanka is still in a dire economic situation. The economy has collapsed. As you drive around the capital, Colombo, it's queues after queues of people lining up for petrol, for gas, for food, for medicine. And that's because people say the Rajapaksa family has wasted the country's money, that they've overspent, that they have also made terrible economic decisions, and they really want to see them out. People are having a hard time even surviving on a day-to-day basis. 1 in 5 people are hungry here right now, and today we're going to wait and see whether people end up celebrating the end of the Rajapaksas, whether they eventually decide to move out of the buildings that they have occupied in Colombo, or whether they continue their protests on the streets.
OK. For now, Nicole, thank you. Breaking news at home now, and the state of the UK economy and the cost of living crisis. Let's bring Paul Kelso in, our business correspondent, of course. Hello to you. Paul, just hearing from the Chancellor saying he's not complacent. Tell us about the figures.
Yeah, perhaps a good thing, given he's only been in the job 8 days, Kay, but he has got a little bit of good news, no matter how long he's in that office this morning. A surprising upturn in GDP. In May, the economy grew by 0.5%. That's against expectations, which were that things would be stagnant, and it increases on April when the economy contracted by 0.2%. So that growth in the economy, however, is from a slightly surprising quarter. It's largely driven by growth in what the ONS calls human health and social care sector. It's a rise in GP appointments has driven this increase, the largest contributor to the increase in GDP, and that's offset one of the drags on the economy in the last set of figures, which was the winding down of test and trace. Now, you wouldn't necessarily want to build economic health on failing human health, but it does emphasise that GDP does look at economic output in a very broad sense. So how often we go to the doctor counts as economic activity. But every sector has contributed a little bit of growth. In May, production was up 0.9%, manufacturing up 1.4%, and construction up 1.5%. But there is a nagging reminder in these figures of the inflationary pressure which is affecting people so badly and driving the cost of living squeeze. Retail services and consumer-facing services are still contracting. They're going backwards. So we are spending less money. And ultimately, whoever ends up in the office, whether it's Nadeem Zahawi beyond his week and a bit so far, or any of whoever the various candidates appoint, is going to have to deal with this overwhelming pressure to try and deliver growth in the economy despite the pressures that we're facing. OK, for now, thank you.
Still to come on the programme for you this morning, catching up with the Brexit Opportunities Minister, that's Jacob Rees-Mogg, about why he's decided to back Liz Truss for the leadership ahead of a potential vote of confidence in Boris Johnson, joined by Labour's Pat McFadden. And we'll hear about the ways desperate travellers are getting around the crippling delays at the passport office. Chatting a moment ago or two, wasn't I, about which are the worst airports, which are the worst airlines. The Transport Secretary didn't want to get involved with that guessing game, but exclusive research, I should say, seen by Sky News, suggests there has been more disruption at Gatwick than any other UK airport. There have been delays and cancellations at airports across the country due to staff shortages. The information shows that up to mid-July, Gatwick has cancelled the most flights proportionally this year. It cancelled 3.2% of flights, 10 times worse than the best-performing UK airport, which was Stansted. When it's broken down by airline, a COVID-affected Chinese airline is worse, but British Airways is the worst-performing British airline. Ryanair is one of the best-performing airlines in the world. And when we have a look back by country, China, the US and Canada have all been slow to open up. But the UK is the worst-performing major country in Europe. Wow. He's known as the UK's most infamous prisoner. Charles Bronson has been behind bars for nearly 50 years, but now his lawyer is asking the government to grant Bronson a pardon, claiming he's reformed and is no longer a threat to society. Here's our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt.
From inside one of Britain's most secure jails, a plea for help from its most notorious prisoner, a man who's been locked up for nearly 50 years.
I'm 70 years old now, Martin. 70 years old. I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for? People don't believe it. They think I'm a serial killer.
The prisoner's best known as Charles Bronson, but now calls himself Charles Salvador. Jailed originally for armed robbery in 1974, he's been kept in prison with only 2 brief releases because of a series of attacks on jail staff. Bronson's solicitor says he's reformed and is urging the Justice Secretary to grant a pardon. In a letter to Dominic Raab, he asks him to use his prerogative to free Bronson because he says he's made great progress in prison. He says in the letter, the evidence in excess of the last 5 years is clear that his risk of violence has significantly reduced.
The argument is that if he's been able to demonstrate that he's not violent within very high-risk situations in custody towards staff, governors, etc., then the risk falls away if he's released to into the public, because historically, whilst there was a risk to the public, it's never been as severe as towards prison staff and governors.
In 1999, Bronson took a prison teacher hostage for 2 days. He got a life sentence, but was eligible for parole 3 years later. He's soon to have another parole hearing, likely to be the first held in public. But his solicitor claims the Ministry of Justice has done little to help him prepare for it.
There's no independent scrutiny. Decisions are made on him by people that don't know him.
During one period of freedom in an amateur boxing match, Bronson demonstrated his physical fitness, something he says he's kept up.
I can still do 95 press-ups in 30 seconds, so I'm still the governor, mate.
Bronson's parole hearing is not expected until the end of the year. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
95 press-ups in 30 seconds. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you now. MPs want renewed efforts to vaccinate people against COVID-19 as infection rates continue to rise. The Public Accounts Committee says it wants to reduce the number of adults in England who haven't had a jab from 3.25 million. Twitter is suing Elon Musk to force him to complete the £37 billion takeover he agreed to in April. The boss of Tesla said on Friday he was dropping out of the deal because the firm didn't give him enough information about fake accounts. Police have made 4 arrests in a crackdown on people smuggling gangs. The arrests are linked to 2 events in 2019 where 32 migrants were found in the back of a lorry in the Netherlands and France. It's the second major operation in 8 days, following on from 40 arrests in raids across Europe last Tuesday. More than 100 firefighters have tackled a blaze in Trafalgar Square in the heart of central London. The flames broke out in the basement of the Admiralty pub and sent thick smoke billowing around Whitehall. There are no reports of any injuries. Thought there for those firefighters. You know how hot it was yesterday, and they had all of that kit on. What a great job they do. Now, newly released video shows heavily armed police officers hanging back in the corridor of the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde in Texas, while the gunman was inside a classroom killing children. He shot and killed 19 and 2 teachers in May before he was confronted by officers more than an hour after they first arrived. A warning that Martha's report does contain gunfire.
It's the video the families of the Uvalde victims have been fighting to see. Showing for the first time the horror which unfolded inside Robb Elementary School. Here, 18-year-old gunman Salvador Ramos strolls down the hallway. He walks towards the classroom where he will murder 19 children and 2 teachers. A young boy comes round the corner. He survives, scarred like so many by what he saw. 2.5 minutes later, the first police officers arrive. 2 approach the classroom, but soon retreat. Their colleagues hang back. They're joined by several more, carrying guns, wearing body armour, even ballistic shields. Their training makes it clear they should confront the threat immediately, but in the absence of any apparent effective leadership, they don't. 56 minutes into the murderous rampage, another officer stops to get hand sanitizer. It's another 20 minutes before they finally enter the classroom and kill the gunman. For bereaved families, the video confirms an excruciating and deeply infuriating timeline.
How many more kids have to die? How many before people start standing up? You think that, oh, this doesn't happen to me or doesn't happen here or anything until it does. And it will. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we have to do something to stop these kids dying.
With every new detail about this shooting, a community forced to relive its darkest day, and to the crisis response team demands that their mistakes be acknowledged. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
That's pretty difficult to comprehend this morning, isn't it? At home, ambulance services are warning that they're being stretched to breaking point by the current heat wave, and that's likely to get worse as temperatures rise later on in the week. But we've been told that our summers are getting hotter, so this may be the new normal. Shimon standing by for us at Reading University for us this morning, which has a world-renowned weather research division. Also to the west of London, where it seems to be always particularly hot. Maybe that's because you're there, Shaman.
Maybe that is the case. As you say, weather is expected to get significantly hotter over the weekend, but it has cooled down a little bit today and may cool down a little bit over the next couple of days as well. But over the weekend, Sunday into Monday, there has been an amber extreme heat warning set in place for much of England and Wales. And although many of us have been enjoying this sunshine, it can have knock-on effects as well, with severe illnesses as well as disruptions to travel as well, with cancellations of air and rail taking place. And as you say, the ambulance services are also set to their highest level of alert too, and that's due to difficulties of the hot weather. And this is all happening as we're being told that over the next couple of weeks, the temperatures could surpass record highs seen in Cambridgeshire in 2019. Now, I'm at a weather centre here at Reading University. I'm joined by Danny Mengel. He's a meteorologist student here. Hi, it's lovely to be joined with you this morning. So explain, first of all, what exactly is behind us? What are we stood in front of at the moment? Because this is the equipment, right, that measures the temperature.
Yes, this is the Reading Atmospheric Observatory. It takes weather measurements such as the wind, rain, sunshine. We're doing that all day, every day for the last 100 years.
And I've just reported there that we could potentially see the temperatures surpass the highest point that we saw in 2019. Is this correct?
It's very, very much possible. I mean, 7 of the 10 warmest temperatures here on record have come in my lifetime. So it's more than possible it could happen. However, I'm still, pessimistic. I might not, so...
And why are we seeing such hot temperatures? It felt a little bit more like we were in LA or the Caribbean over the last week or so. Why are we seeing such hot temperatures?
Yeah, so recently because of global warming, climate change, it's getting a lot warmer, and it's going to lead to some more mild or warmer conditions and calmer weather, and also just more intense heat, sunlight. So. Yeah.
And are we likely to see this sort of hot weather in future then? And if so, should we be preparing more?
If we don't do any action, then yeah, it'll continue to happen. It'll get worse, and this will become the normality. However, if things do change and we do cut down on energy uses and stuff like that, then yeah, by all means, it can plateau and even come down. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So we will be explaining a little bit more about this equipment later on as well. As I say, ambulance services are warning that they could potentially see some issues as the weather continues to increase over this weekend. So they're asking everyone to be safe and keep cool.
Indeed. So thank you. Just want to highlight something actually about a teenager who's died after getting into difficulties while swimming in a canal. 16-year-old Alfie McCraw went missing in the Air and Calder navigation in West Yorkshire. Police say it's a tragic incident and are urging people not to be tempted to cool off in open water despite the hot weather. Poor little chap. Do bear that in mind. Speaking to the Mayor of Greater Manchester in just a second, asking what his authority is doing to try to protect young people who are thinking about swimming in open water when it's just so hot, and those temperatures due to continue.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Very hot again over the weekend. Met Office have issued a warning, an amber extreme heat warning for much of England and eastern Wales on Sunday and Monday.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the front-runner for the Conservative Party leadership and thus to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland at the moment, as things stand, is Rishi Sunak. Then there are two ladies below him, as figures show at the moment. That's Penny Mordaunt and also Liz Truss. What does she think about it?
Morning. Morning. Is the leadership contest descending into bitterness? Can you really unite after this? Accusations of smear campaigns?
Grant Shapps withdrew from the Tory leadership race yesterday and has now thrown his support behind the front-runner, Rishi Sunak.
Got off to a good start. The rules were then actually changed. They doubled the nomination figures from previously in order to speed through the competition because we're keen to have a new leader in place. I would have been nominated on the old rules. I thought probably not on the new rules. And in any case, looking at the candidates, talking to all the candidates, as I was doing throughout, I actually came to a conclusion that another candidate had the right policies and could certainly be ready to do the job on day one as he walked into Downing Street, and that's, of course, Rishi.
Politics is brutal, though, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Rees-Mogg says he's a socialist. I mean, he's saying it as if that's a dirty word. What do you think?
It's just, look, I think it's best if we just concentrate on the positives for each of our candidates and avoid sort of, perhaps others wouldn't agree, but in this context, quite extreme language.
Socialist a dirty word? It's not to a lot of my viewers this morning.
Well, I mean, clearly a guy who, is fiscally conservative, wants to get the debt and deficit down and debt falling as a proportion of the overall economy. I mean, the idea that this is, socialist is clearly not true.
Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, with us now. Hello to you, Mr. Burnham. Thanks for joining us. Do you think that Rishi Sunak's a socialist?
No, certainly not. He's in the newspapers today saying that he will govern like Margaret Thatcher if he's elected leader. Margaret Thatcher laid the north of England low when she was in government. So I think we could confidently say that levelling up will be dead if he's elected and continues to put that kind of approach forward. So I just think we're looking at a leadership campaign at the moment, though, that is a bit farcical, as your business editor said yesterday. There are two major crises facing the country, the cost of living crisis and the NHS crisis, with all ambulance trusts now on black alert. What are these leadership candidates saying about both of those things? They're in a comfort zone and they're not addressing the issues that are right there in front of the country and that this person will walk into office and have to deal with from day one. So this contest, I'm afraid, is not serious at the moment. And all of them need to put aside the sort of the gimmicks and the jibes at each other and set out how they will deal with the serious issues facing the country from day one.
Do you have any sympathy for Grant Shapps? Because you've been in that position, haven't you, where you've wanted to run and be the leader and it's not come off. It is, as I said, brutal.
Oh, I do. It is a brutal process, but that is politics. And people are putting themselves forward to run the country. So you can expect it to be brutal because you have to be tested. And as I said, I don't think these candidates are being properly tested. The Conservative Party has to do a job for the country. It has to make these people say, what will you do day one in office to deal with the NHS crisis? Now, Kay, correct me if I'm wrong, but has any of these candidates talked properly about the NHS over the last few days? I've not heard it. And here we are in the middle of summer with all ambulance services on black alert. What does that mean for the winter in the National Health Service? None of them have anything to say about it. So how can they walk in and be Prime Minister in those circumstances? They have to be challenged. I think it's revealing today that none of the above comes out top when the public were asked who they want, which suggests it's hardly capturing their imagination. And it even comes joint second amongst Tory members. They're saying none of the above. You know, they have to seriously raise their game if they are genuine about wanting to lead this country in a couple of months' time.
Yeah. We are planning our leadership debate actually on Monday. Why is it that politicians are always cautious about doing debates?
Well, to me, I mean, you referenced Labour leadership elections. I mean, I have had experience of leadership elections, as you say. To me, this feels like a party that wants to go into opposition. It feels as though it's in its comfort zone, playing to the culture war issues, but not actually addressing the things that are affecting people up and down the country. Your viewers, Kay, this morning, who are worrying about their finances, who are worrying about the position in the NHS, this party is not dealing with those issues. It's in its own little world, talking to itself. And it feels to me as though it's a party heading into opposition. And actually, I mentioned Rishi Sunak a moment ago. If I look at the policies of all of them, levelling up will be dead in the water at the end of this Tory leadership campaign, because they are all talking about major tax cuts and a much smaller state. You can't put that forward and then be serious about levelling up the country and levelling up the north of England. So I would say, if that is where we end up at the end of this leadership election, there has to be a general election, because that is a major change from the manifesto on which all of these people were elected in 2019.
Mr Mayor, talk to me about, I don't know if you heard me talking about that young lad, Alfie, who went swimming in a canal and drowned. What would you say to the people in the Northwest, particularly in Greater Manchester this morning? Because we hear about these stories every summer, don't we?
Heartbreaking is the only thing I could think, really, when I saw his picture, and you just imagine what his parents, his family, his friends are going through. We've had something similar here over recent times, Kay. There was a young man who sadly died in Salford Quays last year when he jumped in after a game of football. So we know what friends will be going through in West Yorkshire this morning. You know, over the last 5 years, around just under 50 people have died. Greater Manchester Fire has been called to 43 fatalities, I think. And across the country, I think there were around about 160 deaths last summer. So an even hotter summer, it could be worse. Here in Greater Manchester, we have launched our cold water campaign. And we have been warning about the dangers from June, actually, because it's the shock that can cause the fatality, where people go into, even though it's hot outside, people will go into cold water in a reservoir or in a canal, and it's the shock to the body that causes the problem. So it's helpful, I guess, for me to be able to say that on your programme this morning, Kay. Please look up those campaigns, please promote them amongst family and friends. Certainly, as we go through the next few days, we need to be very vigilant. OK. Thank you, Mr Mayor, as always. Much appreciated. Thanks very much, Kay.
Now, while the current priority for all contenders in the Conservative leadership race is gaining the support of the parliamentary party, if they are to reach the final two, they will then have to shift their focus to all party members up and down the country, up to about 200,000 of them. Joining us is one of those members who also happens to be the youngest sitting Tory Chancellor, Harrison Allman-Varty, who has a seat at Elmbridge in Surrey. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Kay. Thank you.
Who are you leaning towards at this stage?
Currently, it's quite hard to pick. I think there's quite a lot of good candidates out there. For me personally, I'm leaning towards more Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt. I think that's kind of my two favourites at current.
And why is that?
I think for me, Rishi Sunak comes across as most credible. He's definitely got the, I think, most valuable experience. He's managed the country's finances, the last couple of years. So he gives them a good understanding. We generally see progression from that stage of Chancellor into Prime Minister, such as with Gordon Brown. So I think from an experience standpoint, I think he's naturally best suited for that role.
Why not Liz Truss?
For me, Liz Truss, I think she comes across well, but I think when you kind of look at maybe like older footage, for example, like 2014 when she's speaking, it just doesn't really resonate with me. I think she did a good job as Trade Secretary, and I think she's a good advocate of Brexit, but she's just not resonated with me.
OK, and what do you make of some of the suggestions that it's a little bit of a dark arts campaign going on at the moment? How concerned are you, as a young Conservative, about the sort of damage that does at the top?
I think there's always going to be trouble when the Conservatives have been in power since 2010, and, it's been a long time. It's between the two general elections. So I think it's always hard to kind of maintain a squeaky clean kind of reputation, because when you're so focused on running the country, there's always going to be things that happen. So there is always going to be that reputational damage. Unfortunately, it's just how well you can kind of mitigate that and control that and how you're perceived. But I think when you are in power for such a long time, and especially when it's midterm, there's always it's always tough.
OK, just before I let you go, we've got Jacob Rees-Mogg here in the studio to speak to us in just a moment. Give him your 5-second pitch about why you should be Prime Minister in the future.
Why I should be?
Yeah.
Well, I'd quite like to maybe bring a different approach. I think youth and the Conservative Party go hand in hand really well together. So I'd quite like to maybe bring those fresh ideas forward. OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you. Mr. Mogg is here.
Rees-Mogg is here. Would you vote for him?
He sounds absolutely splendid. So I agree with him. We need more young people involved in politics.
But for now, you're going for Liz Truss. Why?
I am. Why? Because in Cabinet, Liz was the most supportive Cabinet Minister in getting Brexit opportunities and was using her role and her chairmanship of Cabinet committees to make sure we could get the Brexit opportunities through. She also opposed the endless tax rises of the former Chancellor, which I think have been economically damaging. I also was opposed to within Cabinet. And I think that's important, that you have somebody who is fiscally on the right side of the argument, who doesn't believe that higher taxation is the right answer to every question. And because I think she's been very good in leading with the Prime Minister on Ukraine and making sure we had a strong response to Russia. So I think in foreign policy and domestic policy and European policy, she's got the right answers.
How important is loyalty to you?
Extremely important.
How long do you think she'd been planning her campaign for?
Well, I think lots of people had had drinks parties with other MPs and they had had meetings. But that's the routine business of Cabinet Ministers. Even I had drinks parties with other MPs when I was allowed to.
So they've been plotting for ages then?
No, I don't think that's right. I think that you have a job as a Cabinet Minister to meet other MPs so that you hear the views of backbenchers and understand what their concerns are. As Leader of the House, mine were mainly around issues to do with parliamentary procedure and so on. But the Foreign Secretary would naturally have them with other members of Parliament to find out what their views were on foreign policy.
I'm standing out their support.
No, that's the assumption that gets made. It's not setting up a website. It's not getting ready in December for a campaign to come sometime later.
That's a different domain name quite a long time ago.
That's a different order of magnitude. I have no idea whether she registered a domain name, but it's very important that cabinet ministers, whilst they're in cabinet, are loyal. I was, as you know, and am a great supporter of Boris Johnson and was involved in his campaign very early on. But that did not happen until he had ceased to be Foreign Secretary.
You say Liz Truss is a strong Brexiteer. In fact, you were in number 10 with Nadine Dorries saying that she is a stronger Brexiteer than you and Nadine Dorries put together. Did she not vote for Remain?
I think you need to look at what people are doing now. It is possible for people to change their mind. So, yes, of course, everyone knows Liz voted for Remain.
I thought so.
But what I was saying is within Cabinet, it's very interesting because when we had a right round on the retained EU law bill, Foreign Secretary was completely supportive about getting rid of the supremacy of EU law and having a sunset on EU law. One of the departments that objected was the Treasury, which didn't want tax policy to be taken away from EU interference. So you have a department led by an ostensible Brexiteer that was backing the supremacy of EU law, and a department led by an ostensible Remainer that was backing ending the supremacy of EU law. I think you have to judge people by what they do currently.
To that end, European Convention on Human Rights, even Dominic Raab says that he wanted to remain as part of that, whereas Liz Truss was saying yesterday, I believe, that she thinks that we shouldn't be. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's a bill before Parliament at the moment, the UK Bill of Rights, British Bill of Rights, which is a sensible way of proceeding. What we need to be able to do is recognise that the highest form of law in this country is law made in Parliament, that is our authoritative law and that must be enforced, and that is subject to the greatest of human rights, democratic oversight.
Yeah, but the Justice Secretary is bringing that forward, and even he has said that he thinks that we should still remain within the European Convention.
But the European Convention is not in and of itself a bad document. It is how it is interpreted and applied, and the ridiculous injunction imposed by the European Court stopping the Rwandan deportations, which had been approved by UK courts and had been approved by the UK Parliament, is not something that the UK can carry on putting up with.
So you agree with her, we should come out of it?
We have... Well, whether you need to come out of it formally or whether you can get derogations is a different matter. I think getting derogations is probably a simpler way of doing it.
Nadine Dorries, who, again, we saw you with yesterday, accusing Rishi Sunak, or certainly the campaign, of dirty tricks by lending votes to Jeremy Hunt. What do you think? I have no idea whether that's going on or not. If it was?
Well, what we need to do is to get two candidates to the final round in a way that the members of the Conservative Party can choose. I'm strongly in favour of the mandate coming from members of the Conservative Party. I'm sure that no one would wish to stitch it up in advance, and if they did, I would think that would be improper. But I don't have any evidence that people are doing that.
So lending votes would be inappropriate, is how you feel about that?
But I'm not making any accusations of that kind.
I'm
no,
saying
but you know how it is.
If it were to happen.
With interviews, that things can sometimes get taken out of context later. So to be absolutely clear, I have no evidence that's going on. But if it were going on, it would obviously be improper.
Why do you think he's a socialist, Rishi Sunak?
Well, now you're referring to things that may or may not have been said in Cabinet, and I'm glad to say there's a 30-year rule, actually reduced to 20 years.
Do you think he is a socialist?
I think as a Chancellor, he made decisions that were of the left rather than of the right, that he was a tax-increasing Chancellor. As I said, I didn't support the decisions he made. I thought we should have been looking at keeping expenditure under control rather than raising taxes. And I think the corporation tax rise was bad for business, bad for investment in the UK. The national insurance hike hits employers just after we're getting over the COVID problem and makes life harder for employees when we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis. I think these were bad tax rises.
So many of the candidates that I've been speaking to over the last few days are evoking the memory of Margaret Thatcher. Why are they doing that?
Well, because they think she's a golden ticket with the membership.
Is she?
I think the memory of Margaret Thatcher is highly regarded within the Conservative Party, certainly by people like me, and I think many of our members. But people don't always get what Margaret Thatcher did right. They have selective memories as to what she did. So I hear somebody's been saying that she would not be cutting taxes now. The first thing she did in 1979, when she became elected, they had a budget straight away, which had very significant cuts in taxation. So to say Margaret Thatcher would not have been a tax cut, I think is simply wrong.
But your candidate is even moulding herself in Mrs Thatcher's image.
Well, Margaret Thatcher was a great lady, so a reincarnation of Margaret Thatcher is, I think, improbable. But nonetheless, Margaret Thatcher's a very great lady.
And of the 8 candidates that are left, which of the ones would you not work with?
Well, it's a democratic process, and the party membership must decide, and I would remain a loyal backbencher, whoever was elected. I believe in conservatism.
I'm talking about particularly about a cabinet post.
No,
Would you accept a cabinet post from Rishi Sunak?
No, of course I wouldn't. I believe his behaviour towards Boris Johnson, his disloyalty, means that I could not possibly support him, and he wouldn't want me in his cabinet anyway.
So it's entirely mutual?
Oh, I'm sure it is, yes. I don't think there'd be any question of him wanting me in his cabinet, but I couldn't support somebody who has been so disloyal to the current leader of the party. From inside cabinet. And that's so important. Tom Tugendhat and Jeremy Hunt have behaved perfectly properly. They were entitled from outside cabinet to make it clear that they didn't want Boris Johnson to continue as Prime Minister. That is a reasonable thing to do, but if you're bound by collective responsibility, you should stick to that whilst you're in the cabinet. If you don't like the Prime Minister, if you think he should be replaced...
And Nadeem Zahawi?
Nadeem sent his letter in when he thought the writing was on the wall and it was just a recognition of the reality. That was a matter of judgment very late in the day.
Okay. We're almost out of time. And Sajid Javid deserved his bloody nose then, did he?
No, Sajid is a very decent chap. He put out an excellent document on the economy, really very strong one. He's fallen out. I don't wish to say disobliging things about Sajid.
But he behaved in the same way Rishi Sunak did.
Well, I spoke to him yesterday and said I couldn't possibly support him on the same basis.
Good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
A bit early in the morning, but nonetheless, a pleasure.
Welcome to my world.
I know, I admire your stamina.
Oh, well, you're very kind. Thank you very much indeed. Still to come on the programme for you, we're going to be chatting to Tamara about what we've made so far of the candidates and those that are supporting them. And then, of course, we have Prime Minister's questions at midday today. And then between 1:30 and 3:30, the first rounds of votes. We should know by 5 o'clock who's through to the next round of the Tory leadership contest and indeed who is out on the rear. Stay tuned for more here on Sky.